There's one thing that always bothered me while watching Sons of Garmadon, and that is, what the hell are these? Now, don't get me wrong, I love this season. In fact, it's my favorite season of the entire show. But I really think that it has a massive problem regarding the Oni Masks, which is, it doesn't really explain them well. We know almost nothing about their lore, about their origins, why they were created, or really even what they represent inside of the Ninjago universe. Now sure, there's probably a bunch of writer statements or information on the wiki that explain this. But the thing is, the show itself doesn't. And I think that is a problem. And in fact, a problem that has been going on with this franchise for quite a while now. The show itself seems to forget a lot about explanations and actually giving information to the viewer, and then it ends up depending on external media like Blue Sky or Twitter or magazines or stuff like that to actually explain the actual story that we should be able to understand watching the show alone. Because the truth is, Ninjago, at the end of the day, is made for kids. And a kid isn't going to follow Tommy Andressen or Doc Wyatt or any other Ninjago writer on Blue Sky so he can understand the story of the show. But even if we're talking about an adult fan, like myself, not everyone loves Ninjago that much to the point where they're going to spend minutes, hours, or sometimes even entire afternoons searching the internet to find a single piece of information about that one thing that kinda confused them about the show. Which is why I think this is such a big problem. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is not what I'm here to talk about today, I'm here to talk about the Oni Masks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to base myself on the show and only the show. I'm going to disregard any writer statement or any information that you can find on the wiki or anything like that, magazines, all of that, and I'm going to form a theory or a headcanon, however you want to call it, basing myself on the show and the show alone. To start off this theory, I want to make a claim, which is what I'm going to try to support throughout the rest of the video. And that is, the Oni Masks are the exact opposite to the golden weapons. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff that makes me believe this, but the first thing that made me come up with this idea is the fact that the masks and the weapons form a nice parallel with the dragons and the Onis. Now, if we look at the dragons, we can see that while they possess quite literally the complete opposite of a destructive power, which is creation itself, they have big destructive bodies and a physical ability, which is flight. The golden weapons are also like that. They possess the powers of creation, non-destructive powers, even though, lightning, ice, earth, and fire are destructive, but right now I'm not talking about them separately, I'm talking about them when united. Like, for example, think about the Mega Weapon, for example, which had the power of creation itself. Don't think about them separately, think about them united. When united, they have a non-destructive power, creation, but their weapons, even without elemental powers, they're still powerful, they're still destructive. They're a sword, they're a scythe, shurikens, nunchucks. Even if they didn't have the abilities that they have, even if they didn't have creation, they'd still be powerful and in a destructive way. Just like dragons, who, even if they didn't have elemental powers, would still be powerful in a destructive way with their bodies and physical ability of flight. The Onis and the Oni Masks are also like that. Onis have the most destructive power of all, destruction itself, but their bodies are small and weak, just like a human's body. However, they have dark magic, a hex type ability, a non-destructive ability. In a way, It's almost like the Oni's bodies and magic are the equivalent to the dragon's creation, and the dragon's bodies and flight are the equivalent to the Oni's destruction. And the Oni Masks are similar to the Onis, just like the golden weapons are to the dragons, in which they have the powers of destruction, they have destruction, but they aren't destructive per se. Masks aren't really something you can use to attack someone. They're not a sword or a shuriken, nothing like that. They're a mask. At best they can be useful for defense, and honestly, even that kinda not really. With this mask specifically, not really, because we see that they're quite fragile actually. However, just like the Onis have magic, the Oni Masks also have an ability that the golden weapons don't have. And what is that? The fact that if Kai, for example, has the Sword of Fire and is facing another swordsman or an enemy that knocks him to the ground, there's a high chance of him losing the weapon. However, if Harumi, for example, is using the Mask of Hatred and fighting someone, if she's knocked to the ground, the mask is stuck to her face, it's probably not gonna fall off. And if the enemy wants to take the mask out of her face, they have to find a way to grab the mask and pull it out of Harumi's, or whoever the user is, face, which is much harder than just disarming someone. Therefore, it's almost like the fact that the golden weapons are weapons is basically the equivalent to the dragon's bodies, and the fact that the Oni masks are masks and therefore harder to remove from the user is the equivalent to the Oni's magic. Moving on, I want to talk about the mask's powers. Starting off with the Mask of Vengeance. This mask was presented to us in episode 1 of the 8th season. However, its power was only shown to us in episode 2, when Mr. E uses it against Kai, Jay, Cole and Nia at the palace. We can see that when Mr. E uses the mask, he gains 4 arms and also an ability that seems to let him redirect elemental powers or elemental attacks back to the user or really against anything he wants. And this makes me believe that the Oni Mask of Vengeance has 2 powers instead of only 1. And this actually makes sense. As we know, creation in the show is often associated with balance and maintaining the balance itself, the balance between creation and destruction, the balance between good and evil. That's something that creation is heavily associated with. Therefore, we can assume, and I feel like this is something we all can agree on, that earth, lightning, fire and ice, the powers of creation, are all equal to each other. However, destruction is not like that. Destruction is chaotic. Destruction is often associated with disrupting the balance. Therefore, we can assume that the powers of destruction, which I haven't mentioned yet, but I will later, are not equal to each other. So there's a power that is stronger than all, then there's a second place, a third place, and a last place, or fourth place. And because of that, and also the fact that the Oni masks were created by an Oni warlord each, and there were only 3 Oni warlords, so each one created a mask, I think that the Oni warlord that created the red mask decided to give it the 2 weaker powers, to make it still be somewhat equivalent and somewhat just as powerful as the other 2 masks, who individually have powers, or rather, who have powers that individually are stronger than the individual powers that the Oni Mask of Vengeance has. And what are those powers? Well, I think that they are the shape-shifting ability of the Onis and also some kind of elemental redirection. I've already explained elemental redirection, but I'll explain shape-shifting. The reason I think the mask gives this power are Mr. E's 4 arms. Most people assume that's a natural ability of the mask, but I don't think it is. And the main reason I don't is because, besides Garmadon, who we know why he has 4 arms, there's not a single Oni in the show with 4 arms. So, I think that Mr. E, when using the mask, uses shapeshifting to give himself 4 arms just like Garmadon has, as some form of tribute or homage to Garmadon, since he's basically his and all of the other sons of Garmadon's god. Moving on to the Mask of Deception, which is probably the most straightforward out of the bunch. Its power is pretty obvious: telekinesis. We see it for the first time when Kilo uses the mask and, with only his mind and also a few movements from his arms and hands, is able to lift Zane's motorcycle into the air and also a bunch of rocks that were in the area. Like I said, this is a really straightforward mask, so we're actually already moving on to the next one, the Mask of Hatred, which is a little bit more complex than this one, but still pretty much more straightforward than the Mask of Vengeance. When the mask is first used in episode 7, Game of Masks, Harumi states it gives her a taste of invincibility. However, I don't think that invincibility is the mask's power. Mainly because it would be too overpowered, but also because we do see people using this mask, like Ultraviolet in Season 9 for example, and being defeated by physical attacks. Now sure, it did take an entire tank to defeat Ultraviolet, but the point is, she was defeated by a physical attack, which shouldn't be possible if she was invincible. And also, because we know that Garmadon has the powers of the masks, because like I said, I think they're the powers of destruction, but also because the show itself shows Garmadon using these powers, and if the Mask of Hatred did grant invincibility, then Garmadon should never be defeated by the Omega or the Overlord like he is multiple times. Therefore, I think that the mask's power is simply super resistance. Kinda like Karloff's metal form, except Karloff's metal form gives him also super strength and super resistance, while this power would be only super resistance but like higher than Karloff's metal form. With that said, I want to move on to the last thing that makes me believe my theory, and also the main one, which is, just like the golden weapons, the Oni Masks are able to open portals to other realms. In the pilot episodes, where the golden weapons are introduced, we see that when Samukai dies due to trying to use all of them at the same time and failing because he's not powerful enough, a portal is opened. A portal that Garmadon then uses to escape to the realm of madness. And, in Season 8, we see Harumi doing something similar. She uses a ritual, which uses all of the masks, to open a portal to the departed realm and then resurrect Garmadon. So, I think that, when united, the golden weapons give the user the ability to open a portal, or, at the very least, the explosion that happens when they're united opens a portal for some reason. Maybe it's some kind of reality-shattering explosion and that's a hole in reality, for example. I don't know. But it's something like that. And so, since the Oni Masks, according to my theory, are the opposite to the golden weapons, I think that they'd also explode if someone weaker than them tried to use them. Therefore, they would also open the portal. And I think that the ritual that Harumi does at the Temple of Resurrection is merely a magic ceremony that uses the Oni Masks to open a portal to the departed realm, and then uses the DNA of relatives to track and resurrect someone, in this case, Lord Garmadon. So, in conclusion, what do I think the Oni Masks are? I think they are the opposite to the golden weapons. They carry the powers of destruction, and, along with the golden weapons, they form a nice parallel with the Onis and dragons. I think that just like the golden weapons, they can open portals to other realms, and I think Harumi used that to open a portal to the departed realm through a magic ceremony. With that said, I'll end the video here. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like, a comment, and consider subscribing. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see each other next time.